Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to today's exciting event. My name is Jason Oxman. I'm the president and CEO of ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council. We are the 105-year-old trade association of the technology industry. And today marks an important episode in our Bridge for Innovation event series. We're thrilled to host a discussion today with Federal Communications Commission Commissioner Jeffrey Starks, and a roundtable with our own ITI member companies who are working tirelessly every day to expand broadband connectivity across the United States. Now, ITI's Bridge for Innovation campaign focuses on how good public policy can help improve and expand our nation's digital connectivity. Digital infrastructure, as we all know, forms the foundation that allows all Americans to enjoy the economic and the social benefits of the online economy, but it also gives us access to virtual healthcare services and online education. It helps small businesses sell products and services online, and importantly, during the pandemic, it enables remote working for businesses and organizations of all sizes and allows us all to gather together today virtually for this important discussion. Now, just a few weeks ago, bipartisan passage and enactment of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act guaranteed $65 billion in federal funding for broadband to help close the pervasive digital divide. This is a massive investment in our future and promises to improve the lives of Americans for decades to come. Now, the big question going forward, of course, is how to implement this law most effectively. And it raises some very interesting policy questions that we're going to dive into today. Now, you all know the Federal Communications Commission is charged with updating broadband maps, for example, to determine locations for broadband grants. And there's been a lot of discussion about concerns about the accuracy of these maps. I'd encourage you all to check out a January 4th story in Protocol about Deer Isle in my home state of Maine, and suggestions that map data needs to be updated there to ensure that the digital divide can be addressed. Another issue that we're paying a lot of attention to as we look to implementation of this new infrastructure law, the Buy America provisions of the Act. These are content requirements that could have an adverse effect on the availability of equipment needed for broadband deployment because communications equipment manufacturers all have global supply chains. So as ITI works with the administration on the best approach to ensure that broadband equipment is readily available, the FCC's expertise here will be important as well. Now, we're going to hear from Commissioner Starks in just a moment. He's been a leader in promoting policies to help all Americans get online. And then we have a distinguished group of ITI member companies with us today as well, leaders who are on the front lines of expanding broadband access. They'll join us for a discussion about how this historic investment can best be used to help the greatest number of Americans. Now, we're streaming today's discussion live on YouTube, and a recording will be available on our YouTube channel and on our bridgeforinnovation.org campaign website. You can also follow the conversation on Twitter, and we encourage you all to tweet during this event, #BridgeForInnovation. Now, I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks for our fireside chat today. Commissioner Starks was sworn in to serve as a commissioner on the Federal Communications Commission in 2019. He was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, which is a very important distinction and something that not a lot of public policy aficionados can say. The FCC, of course, is heavily involved in implementation of this infrastructure investment, and we are delighted to have Commissioner Starks with us today to talk about what the FCC is going to be doing, what he's going to be calling on the FCC to do as we move forward with this important implementation. Commissioner Starks, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Jason, with you and your member companies, and eager to start the dialogue, part of an ongoing dialogue that we've all been having on these issues of digital divide, and in particular, what infrastructure is going to mean and reverberate throughout the ecosystem here.
Well, we appreciate your willingness to listen to industry input as you listen to consumer input as well. And implementation of this act, I know, this law, is vital to your portfolio of issues at the FCC. So I want to talk about some very recent developments at the FCC. The Commission has now launched what's called the Affordable Connectivity Program. But of course, this is a successor program. The FCC has already been engaged in the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, helping those who are on the wrong side of the digital divide get access to vital broadband services. So this has been an issue that you started talking about even before your confirmation. You've been out around the country talking about the digital divide and the importance of closing this affordability gap for broadband. So I wonder if you can share, to start, your perspectives on where the FCC has been and what you've seen and what you've learned from programs that the FCC has already implemented around broadband funding, and kind of how those lessons learned inform what you're advocating for as the FCC launches the Affordable Connectivity Program going forward.
Yes, great question. You know, as a commissioner, bridging the digital divide has been truly my number one priority. Historically, and to be sure, I'm from Kansas. And so a lot of folks, rightfully so, have focused on the availability issue, colloquially kind of goes to impacting rural America in many ways. But what I have found and what I've started to talk about even more is the fact that there are nearly 47 million Americans who don't have the internet simply because they can't afford it. And so, of course, to drill down a little bit, research is telling us 29% of Black adults, 35% of Latinx adults, 43% of low-income households are exactly the folks that are not connected. And so it's become clear that affordability is something that we have to solve, especially as your kind of lead-in prologue talked about. The crisis is in schools, it's in work, it's in jobs, it's in all the everyday activities to help us connect with loved ones and friends and family. But here's the point, is that for these most vulnerable families, it's never been more important to get them connected. And I always say, if you're having food insecurity, if you're having housing insecurity, I can guarantee you that you're also likely experiencing digital insecurity. And so Congress has responded and came up with the programs that we've had. EBB, where more than 9 million households are already enrolled, and now transitioning to ACP, as you mentioned, to really focus on that affordability gap. We still do have more families and households that need to get to these affordable programs. And so this is going to be part of the ongoing liftoff that we're going to have as we transition from EBB to the ACP. But really, again, the point is, I want there absolutely to be less people figuring out how to deal with their monthly budget that sometimes leaves broadband issues on the short end. And so the new infrastructure law will expand eligible households. It also gives the commission more advertising dollars. So we'll be voting on this. I'll be voting on this later this week. But I expect a lot from this program going forward. $14.2 billion now we have to focus on affordability.
Well, and it's a terrific program. And as you noted, there is no doubt anymore as to whether broadband is a necessity or a luxury. It is a necessity. It's a utility. It's water. It's electricity. It's as important to our kids' ability to learn as it is to our ability to work. So thank you for your focus on that and for helping the rest of the country understand that broadband is a necessity. One of the challenges that I mentioned earlier that you're dealing with is trying to figure out where this money should go. Yeah. And I wanted to ask for your thoughts on other programs related to the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, such as an update to those broadband maps that we've heard so much about, because I know you need data in order to make decisions about this, where this money can go. And this is a fraud issue. I mentioned this Politico article from earlier this week. Like your home state of Kansas, my home state of Maine is a very rural state. we have better views of the ocean and better seafood, but we also have a lot of areas that are on the wrong side of the digital divide. And this story about Deer Isle caught my attention because there was a suggestion that some of those broadband maps included data from incumbents that frankly don't want funding coming in to challenge their monopoly on service. So that's an interesting issue. But then you just have the other issue of this data it's hard. It's hard to figure out where broadband is and where it's not. So can you help us understand how industry can be helpful to your efforts, how this data is going to be part of your analysis of where this funding should go?
Yes, the data and where we stand with mapping is critically important. As ever, we need to move as expeditiously as possible. Congress, as you mentioned, structured the infrastructure package so that really the bulk of the broadband infrastructure money, over $42 billion, will flow through NTIA. But that is very much, wedded to making sure that this money gets to the right places, and that's involved with mapping.
And they use, sorry to interrupt, but you're right, I should have made that clear. NTIA uses FCC maps to make those decisions, right?
Yes, exactly right. And so obviously the Chair Rosenworcel has committed, to sharing FCC's information expertise with NTIA. But everybody, to your point, agrees that the FCC's broadband maps are essential. They need to work better. They need to make sure that these dollars get to the right place. And Congress has made those historic, investments that need to be targeted. And so, really quickly to run you where I understand things are, at the commission, the Broadband Data Task Force is working to build the necessary systems, processes. We have hired a data architect, awarded a contract to build the data platform for the broadband data collection. And again, what I understand is that we're in the process of procuring that broadband serviceable location fabric that will be the essential foundation for improved broadband data gathering at the agency. When that's done, the fabric will be able to, as promised, show broadband serviceable location across the country. And so this does, though, as the chair indicated in her confirmation hearing, this is subject to the federal acquisition regulations process and procurement. And so the contract at issue here kind of has to play out in the right way. Two other things that I would really kind of focus you on, in the infrastructure package is price transparency. So in addition to the issue of mapping, the infrastructure package gives the FCC the responsibility to have specific directives to focus improving price transparency, which has been a long-standing point of making sure that consumers know what they are buying. And so we'll soon be collecting and publishing price information from the broadband providers participating in the ACP. And that is also going to be something later this month that I'll vote on with seeking the nutrition label that will talk about displaying prices and other service details so that consumers can make the best choice for them.
That makes a lot of sense. And obviously consumers are going to benefit from having more choice out there, more robust options. And I know one of the things you're very focused on is making sure that there are a variety of technologies that are funded, whether it's wireline or wireless. Different technologies address different geographies differently. I wanted to ask you you brought up pricing and consumer disclosure. And I know the Universal Service Fund can be a topic of a multi-day conversation, given that it has its roots back in the original Communications Act of 1934 and the FCC's original mandate to get wireline dial service, voice service out to every American. But of course, the Universal Service Fund is still around today. It's still important. And the FCC is looking at Universal Service Fund reform to update it for the modern era to make sure that not only on the cost side, it's funding the right things, but on the collection side, it's also being collected on the right things as well. USF is, again, a very esoteric topic. You've got a lot of great people working on this issue at the FCC on a daily basis. Can you tell us a little bit about how we should all be thinking about USF reform proceedings in the context of the broadband initiatives that the FCC has underway, that NTIA has underway. How should we be thinking about that? How do they fit together, and what are you looking to accomplish in that?
It's a great question, and I think the headline here is exactly that. We want to make sure that all of these pieces are fitting together well, and serving Americans where they are needed. Universal service is absolutely mission critical to ensuring Americans have access to communication services. And so as we're trying to figure out, the existing USF structure, Congress, as you mentioned, specifically tasked us with examining whether the current program structure is fulfilling, USF's underlying purpose of ensuring that all Americans, regardless of location or income, have access to that comparable telecom and information services. Section 254, calls specifically for the commission to consider, the principles that are necessary and appropriate for the protection of public interests, convenience, necessity, all those, and so, taking two steps back, the main legacy programs that we have in our USF, rural healthcare, high cost, Lifeline, E-rate, they have seen the additions in addition to the Treasury and USDA that have long also, had programs here, just in the very recent memories here. Now we have EBB, we have telehealth specifically that are programs. And so thinking about the interplay between them. So taking that comprehensive look at our USF programs to fulfill our statutory duty is really going to be absolutely important. And the USF's funding mechanism, as you mentioned, has also reached a critical point. We're asking, smaller numbers of consumers to contribute steadily towards an increasing, contribution factor. And so all of this is going to be part of our discussions. The other thing that I would mention that is also part of the infrastructure package that is a little bit not an issue directly in your question, but that is, the digital discrimination, the digital redlining report that we were also asked to do. The issues of digital equity have never been more important. And so that is going to be something that is also going to be a focus. Congress gave us 2 years to work on that, but making sure that we are reaching folks on that absolutely issue of rural, of accessibility to urban areas, to low income, without regard to race, income. These are going to be absolutely important points as well on the digital discrimination that we're going to have to work on.
And are there things that we should be thinking about in industry, just to follow up on that, that we can be helpful to your effort around that require congressional action? And I ask this in the context of some of the definitions that you mentioned. Some of them are decades old, where the classroom is not necessarily a physical classroom anymore. And I know you've been working hard to make sure that universal service dollars and other educational funding that's available through FCC programs is extended beyond physical classrooms, is useful for Wi-Fi connections, for example, where kids over the last couple of years have been going to school in the parking lots of McDonald's because they can't afford a connection at home, or they don't have access at home, and the school was where they were used to accessing the internet. Can you help us think through how we can be most helpful to you? Is a lot of this within the purview of the FCC under current definitions? Is there congressional action that's necessary? Are there things that industry can do to help address these pervasive divide issues that you're talking about?
It's an absolutely great question. I think certainly, holistically, the issue of privacy is one that comes to mind as something that is more and more present and a throbbing need that folks need to focus on. And we are hearkening back to a lot of old definitions, both in the Communications Act and elsewhere, to help folks with privacy. But I have been extremely, my colleagues and I'll certainly speak for myself, have been very active in helping and working with Congress, from EBB to ECF to now over $14 billion for affordability. I think Congress has given us a lot to chew on, a lot of work to do. obviously the 42 billion that is before NTIA. But more than anything, this is the push that a lot of us have been talking about for a really long time to make sure that we connect every American everywhere. And so a lot of the definitions, affordability is something that I've been talking about for a long time, but before the start of last year, we really did not have active, specifically addressable affordability programmatic. Lifeline was its own thing, but making sure all of these start to work together is going to be something that industry has to come together. Obviously, the FCC is not out there laying fiber, so we need industry, we need partners, the equipment manufacturers, and of course, us on the policy and the policy angle. We all have to make sure that we're pushing together because it's going to be, the time is now.
One last thing that I wanted to ask you about, because our time is close, is you've been very active on the world stage as well, and really working tirelessly to emphasize the importance of engagement between U.S. bodies like the FCC and international standards bodies, public-private partnership. Chairwoman Rosenworcel has made this a priority as well. Additional staff have been added at the FCC to work on these international standards issues. I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about why this is important to you. How do you view the respective roles of the federal government and industry in maintaining strong leadership, particularly in international bodies?
Yes, this has been something that I've been focused on, and in particular, this is another one where a confluence of actors all have to be rowing in the same direction in a lot of ways. And so it takes industry, academia, policymakers, all, and in particular, something that has become more prominent in the international standard setting bodies as well is a little bit of the focus on democracies across the world. And so the private sector should definitely continue to lead in standard setting efforts. The government has a critical role to play, given the economic and security stakes. The FCC must continue to expand our attendance, participation in standard setting meetings. As you indicated, the chair has made this a priority. She works with our staff. I've worked with our staff to make sure that we continue to amp up that. But we also have to continue our work with other agencies, convening stakeholders from the U.S. and elsewhere, identifying those common positions, mapping out strategic points for these meetings. Earlier, just this year, Senator Warner, I note, flagged this issue for Secretary of State Blinken, regarding, the ongoing OECD meetings, making sure that there are fair voting and contribution processes in these standard setting bodies. All of this comes together in ways that year over year, we see the international bodies really kind of make an important, play a significant role here.
Crucially important, particularly on competitiveness issues. We know that China is looking to step up their activities in these international bodies. So appreciate your attention to ensuring U.S. participation in all those groups. Commissioner, you've been very generous with your time, and we are so grateful for you being with us here today. Last thing I had to ask about before we go, a little bit off topic, but you probably are well aware that on Sunday night at 8:15 p.m. Eastern, the 12-5 Kansas City Chiefs will take on the 9-7 Steelers of Pittsburgh. Second time they've met this season. Of course, on December 26th, the Chiefs handily defeated the Steelers 36-10. I just wondered if you had any plans on watching that game on Sunday night, or if there's anything else on your schedule.
I will be watching. The Starks kiddos will be watching, and we hope the Kansas City Chiefs lower the boom here.
Excellent. I had no doubt that would be a family gathered around the TV on Sunday night. Well, on a more serious note, the issues that you are at the center of here are incredibly important to the future success of all Americans, and can't express enough how grateful all of us at ITI are for your dedication, for your commitment to public service, and for your time today and talking to us about these important issues.
Thank you, Jason. To everyone out there, of course, be safe, be well. look forward to working with you and continuing the dialogue. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner. And we turn to our roundtable with our members in just a moment. So delighted to have with us 4 ITI member company representatives who are at the core of implementation of this infrastructure investment opportunity. The point of our discussion with Commissioner Starks, of course, was to highlight the public policy challenges with implementation. Now we move on to the business challenges and opportunities presented by the funding and modernization of our digital infrastructure. I'm going to briefly introduce our 4 panelists to you, and then we'll move very quickly into our discussion. First with us today is Alyssa Cooper. Alyssa is the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Technology Policy and a Fellow at Cisco Systems. John Lynn is EVP and General Manager of Data Center Services for Equinix. Durga Maladi is Senior Vice President and General Manager of 5G mobile broadband and infrastructure at Qualcomm Technologies. And Jason Zelli is Marketing Development Manager of Carrier Networks and Emerging Accounts at Corning. Well, I want to thank all 4 of you for being with us today for this important discussion. And I want to start off asking a question for each of you that flows from the remarks of Commissioner Starks. We've heard about the policy challenges and the need for haste in implementing the infrastructure law. But I want to ask each of you for your perspective and your company's perspective on what this opportunity really means for all Americans. What is, from your perspective, the real benefit to American consumers and businesses of expanded connectivity? What do you think the passage of this Infrastructure and Jobs Act is going to mean for Americans and for the future of expanded connectivity? Alyssa, can I please start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Jason. And thanks so much for having me here today. I think when you look at this infrastructure investment, it's historic. It's game changing. You can't find the superlatives to describe this necessarily. If we look at the amount of public funding that was previously out there for broadband, this law more than doubles the amount of public funding that's available. And it's the single largest investment that has ever been made at one time to infuse public funding into broadband specifically. I think when we also reflect on our collective experience of the pandemic, we see not just in individual experiences, but also in the data, how broadband has become a lifeline for people. So we all remember probably back in 2020, we started looking at these huge spikes in usage of the network, and we all saw these graphs of network traffic going through the roof. But a lot of that growth has continued. We're closing in on the 3rd year and coming up on the 3rd year of the pandemic. And that growth continues and in novel ways that we didn't see before. So we are seeing growth in median usage, which means it's not just power users who are growing their bandwidth demands, but it's widespread. And we're continuing to see kind of equal growth in upstream and downstream on the network. And that just tells us that this technology is absolutely central to the lives of all those who have access to it. And why shouldn't everybody else who hasn't had that benefit be able to obtain it? And I really think that this law has the potential to close that gap and just in a truly historic opportunity for all Americans to be able to have those benefits.
And of course, Cisco, Alyssa, is very heavily involved in making the equipment that's going to power those networks. And John Lynn, let me come to you next, because all of that equipment that Alyssa and Cisco will be deploying in the network needs to go somewhere. And one of those places it often goes is into the data centers that Equinix runs. So John, let me ask you the same question that Alyssa just addressed, which is, can you share your perspective and Equinix's perspective on what this infrastructure law will mean for American connectivity?
Yeah, as Alyssa said so well, right? It's incredibly exciting to see the level of commitment and investment that we're putting in. I think the modernization of our broadband infrastructure and increasing access is honestly one of the core corporate goals that Equinix has in being able to connect all people and communities equally and be able to kind of take advantage of the opportunities that are kind of available, both in terms of day-to-day living with certainly through the pandemic we saw a huge increase in telehealth opportunities, distance learning obviously continues, and some of that will continue for the foreseeable future, right? It's, even as the pandemic ebbs and flows, we will fundamentally have changed how we live, how we work, how we continue to operate. And I think what we've seen at large in a lot of these communities as well, the opportunity to fundamentally transform how businesses are actually interacting, right? Actually digitizing all of the work that they're doing, being able to access more and more data sources. And so, to me, broadband is such a critical element to that. But I also think, we can't just stop at access, right? I think when you think about digital infrastructure at large, certainly broadband and fiber is one component of that. The data centers are a component of that. The servers infrastructure is a component of that. The towers themselves are a component of that. And so all of that together needs to be continued to invest in. And I think there's continued work that needs to happen there on the policy side. I think, making it easier to go ahead and have access to data centers closer to the communities, right? Because having the big pipe isn't enough. You need the servers actually close to these communities so that the performance characteristics of the applications is equal to all of these populations. And I think the other key thing is a lot of our infrastructure is aging, right? And I think as we think about the sustainability needs of the country at large, when you think about all of the work that we need to continue to drive around modernizing that infrastructure, there's just huge opportunities there.
Yeah, and that raises an interesting point. And Durga, I want to come to you next on that infrastructure point that John made about the need to get that infrastructure closer to people. Equinix obviously is doing that with the data centers. Qualcomm is very focused on doing that with wireless service. And I mentioned to Commissioner Starks that a technology neutral approach to funding that's available under this broadband law is obviously incredibly important, because wireline solutions are going to be important, but wireless solutions are obviously crucial for people in areas that wireline can't reach. So, Durga, can you tell us from Qualcomm's perspective as a pioneer in 5G and really going all the way back to 3G, which Qualcomm's responsible for, tell us what you think the infrastructure law means to connectivity.
Thanks, Jason, for having me here, and hi, everyone. I want to actually take a 30,000-foot level viewpoint of the way that we see it from the industry standpoint, and specifically from a wireless perspective. And maybe I'll spend a minute just explaining what's happening in the 5G world in general. When the initial rollout of 5G started back in 2019 in the US, obviously from a research and standardization and implementation perspective, we've been working on it for a very long time. And when the initial rollout started happening, the viewpoint of 5G is to have connectivity across people and things, across a multitude of sectors. It's not necessarily confined to just smartphones that we typically associate, wireless technology with, but it's far more than that. We see applications of 5G in anything ranging from enterprise sector, fixed wireless access, industrial routers, manufacturing sector, the ability to connect everything and in a more intelligent manner with the rest of the network. Lots of buzzwords in that, but it is important to actually understand that actually the scope is pretty big. But that also means that for the very first time, there's a larger cross-section of the industry that's actually going to be adopting 5G, who's probably not as familiar with wireless technology in general. For example, if we are interested in digitizing manufacturing plants, we don't use as much wireless technology inside manufacturing plants, but the potential is huge. And we've done lots of studies in that and tests in that to understand what can be done. So from that perspective, having this backing from policymakers with an actual funding that actually helps is a really important aspect, and we really welcome that. Now, I wanted to maybe mention one or 2 points over here, the way that we see wireless, and picking on a couple of examples. We focused a lot right off the bat beyond smartphones into the compute segment, like connected laptops that are always connected using cellular technology, using 5G, in addition to fixed wireless access. Fixed wireless access has the ability to truly bridge that digital divide that exists today between the rural and urban areas. We knew that no matter what, fixed wireless will take off in urban areas based upon all the things that we do. So we spent some time with some of our rest of our partners in the ecosystem. Rural Wisconsin, for example, we started testing how far can you go, how many kilometers can you go to still sustain data rates of like a gigabit per second, just to indicate that rural areas can get that level of broadband connectivity. And most recently in November, we had another activity together with US Cellular showcasing the benefits of fixed wireless space mobile broadband services in rural West Virginia. This was actually done in the mountains of West Virginia and the demo was shown to Senators Manchin and Capito. There was a pretty important event in that. Bottom line is that we see that wireless actually has a very strong role to play as a part of revamping and really bringing infrastructure to state of the art. That's the way that we see from wireless standpoint. Another one point that I wanted to add is on the compute segment. These days, we don't necessarily see our laptops as something which is attached to a cable all the time. The data resides somewhere really in the cloud, but you just need the ability to access the data no matter where you are. Now, this used to be a theoretical concept that kind of made sense in an abstract way, and quite a lot of people got it. But as the pandemic started, it suddenly became extremely important to have connectivity because now you're working from wherever you can work from and not necessarily from workplace, whether it's distance education or an enterprise segment. The role of wireless connectivity has become even more important. The ability, therefore, even in enterprise and education segment, to have this wireless connectivity is extremely critical. So that's the way that we see the overall perspective, and we truly welcome this initiative from policymakers.
Excellent. And Jason, obviously, is fiber optic cable, no question about it. We've been talking about wireless and wireline, and all networks require fiber because those cell towers are fed by fiber. I think the broadband success story that fiber tells is absolutely unparalleled here in the U.S. Compared to the rest of the world. I have the good fortune to spend some time out in West Virginia, which Durga just mentioned, and in the mountains of rural Pocahontas County, West Virginia, a fiber overbuilder provides my little cabin with 100 megabit bidirectional service, which is faster than what I get here in the office. Can you talk to us a little bit about, Jason, about Corning's perspective on what this infrastructure bill means for fiber deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for letting me join. This obviously, like Alyssa said, is historic and unprecedented. There's so many benefits that we're already receiving from this, and we just can't get fiber out fast enough, right? Our customers, carriers, they can't get enough. They can't keep up with the demand they're seeing now. And when you combine that with the funding we're seeing, especially the Investment Act, but also a lot of the private funding that we're seeing as well, it's just an incredible boon for the industry over the next 5 to 10 years. In fact, we expect that there's going to be more homes passed with fiber in the next 5 years than all fiber to the home history in the U.S. So it's a huge lift for the industry, and it's also going to be significant for Americans in that level of connectivity in potentially reversing some of the trends that we've seen. Younger generations that went to the cities can now kind of return home or be more in those rural environments because they can have access to remote education or jobs. You have high-paying tech jobs, right, that can be relocated into areas that are low cost of living. And we think data centers are a critical part of that, right? You can locate data centers as anchor institutions in different parts of the country. We see them here in rural North Carolina, as an example, and provide those high-paying jobs to those residents. And then we can also see, the tribal communities have been getting a lot of attention. We could see revitalization of those communities as well. Not just all the things that we mentioned, but also things like entrepreneurship, where they can now take their businesses outside of their local communities because they have access to high-speed internet. And Commissioner Stark said it well, there's going to be a lot of work to do for everyone, not just the FCC or the NTIA or the states, but the entire industry. And it's exciting, but it's going to take significant collaboration from everyone in our industry, the folks on this call, but also state and local governments that participate together to define the right policies that will effectively bring this to the forefront. And I think the other exciting thing, all the folks on the phone here, Corning as well, we love to innovate. And when you put this much attention on an unserved or underserved market, and you divert a lot of that innovation horsepower, you're going to see some really, really interesting things come out that help speed up and proliferate all these technologies, mainly fed by fiber backbone to all of them. But you're going to see a lot of interesting and new innovations that will really help grow the number of homes that are connected to high-speed internet, including cabins in West Virginia.
Let's talk about those innovations. And Alyssa, let me come back to you with the next thing that I think is important to discuss. And we heard Commissioner Starks essentially issue a request to industry to help the FCC, help the NTIA figure out where these broadband grant dollars should go. So I want to move to the question of what role industry can play. Obviously, ITI is the trade association of the tech industry. On behalf of all of our terrific member companies, is going to be participating in the rulemaking proceedings and helping get these funds out the door. I want to talk about what we should be doing in industry to make sure that these investments are made in the right way, in the right technology neutral path that enables the kind of innovations that Jason's been talking about that we really want to get out there. So Alyssa, let me start with you. What are your thoughts on how industry can best communicate to government about what technologies should be prioritized as part of these funding, what services, what should the FCC and the NTIA, as they are looking to get $65 billion out the door, what should we be suggesting to them that they focus on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a few different pieces of this. So Commissioner Starks talked about the data and the maps. And I think that is like one crucial piece. As an industry, we have the on the ground experience. And he said it himself, the FCC is not laying fiber, right? So it's our companies that are out there on the ground, building these networks, supporting these networks, providing these services. And as a result, we have a lot of that foundational data that is needed to make informed decisions about where service exists, where it doesn't exist. And at Cisco, we think it's very critical to establish that as a trustworthy basis for the policy decisions. It's in everyone's interest to have mapping data and service data that everyone else believes in, so that we don't waste our time arguing about the data and we can move forward and actually build networks where we have people who are underserved. And so that's, I think, a critical role for the industry to play, is just to be forthcoming about the realities on the ground. I think another way is to use that hands-on experience to broaden the pool of people who can understand what these technologies can do. At Cisco last year, we launched our Rural Broadband Innovation Center to do exactly this, to give our customers and prospective customers the ability to really get hands-on with the specific technologies for their particular circumstances. And we're going to have a wide variety here with the infrastructure money. There's a lot of focus on rural. But even within rural, you have very different topographies. You have different kinds of densities. And so giving different kinds of customers and potential operators the ability to use test beds, think about how they would architect in a certain new part of the country that has historically been underserved is another role that industry can play. And lastly, I'll just say, with respect to this, the question of technology neutrality, we're happy to see a technology neutral approach, but technology neutrality does not mean technology blindness. And it's really important that we look at each specific scenario and think about what makes this unique, the cost implications, the topography implications. What is the existing infrastructure in this place? How are the anchor institutions already connected? And what is demand like in this particular area? And find a solution that's appropriate to that area. So sometimes people say this uses term technology neutrality, and it sounds like you just go in blind and you can't use some judgment about how you're going to choose a technology. We'd much rather see a very well informed technology choice that isn't limited arbitrarily by saying it has to be fiber, it has to be 5G or fixed wireless.
And John, speaking of technology decisions, Equinix obviously is in a business that's crucial to the operation of these networks that we're talking about building out and expanding. I had a chance, along with a number of members of the ITI team, to visit an Equinix data center that's just outside of Washington, D.C. A terrific opportunity to see how vital data centers are to these networks connecting with one another. Can you talk to us about, from Equinix's perspective and from the data center industry's perspective, what's important for us to make sure that policymakers understand as they're looking to get this money out about the role that data centers play?
Yeah, I think the point around technology neutrality and kind of vendor neutrality is key, right? I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're creating opportunities and access for not just incumbents, but also new diverse providers to come to bear and take advantage of that opportunity to increase access and improve performance. I think, Equinix operates in 65 metros around the world with over 10,000 customers, but 1,800 of those customers are networks, right? And I think having a really robust, vibrant ecosystem of those players to exist, to be able to access different cloud and IT providers as well to bring those services to these communities is incredibly important there. And I think, this idea around interconnecting these networks together to be able to improve performance is obviously one of the keys to how we've been able to scale the internet at large in the US. And now, as we see the internet becoming, a kind of table stakes, that private interconnection, being able to get your data securely from one private company or one healthcare company to another healthcare company, that private data interchange is increasingly important. So I think there's a huge role then that data centers can play by providing that proximate interconnection for these communities.
It was interesting to hear Commissioner Starks talk about privacy and data as part of this as well, because that's going to be important to the rollout's success. Durga, let me ask you the question about what kind of advice industry should be providing to policymakers to ensure that the grants go out the door in a way that meets the requirements of consumers. What technology issues, what technologies do you think should be prioritized as part of this funding program?
So just from the perspective of, we're casting a very wide net in terms of the different sectors that eventually get transformed by the funding in this. And that's the way that we think about it. So if you start thinking of the enterprise sector, the education sector, transportation, industrial sector, energy sector, these are like a sector viewpoint of these are the different areas where there is a true potential for transformation. And then keeping that aside and then thinking about what is the technology that will actually do that transformation, it's also important to understand that there are two aspects to it, at least from a 5G perspective. It's important to know that we need to have the transformation, not just in terms of the kinds of devices that power these different sectors, but also what kind of networks are in a position to be able to deliver the KPIs and everything else that is needed in those sectors. And on that front, specifically talking about the networks per se, as a part of, it started off in 4G, but it has truly become something that is mainstream as we look ahead into 5G, is if we really want to have wireless networks serving all the way from wide area, nationwide, citywide based deployments, all the way down to a single manufacturing plant, to a single enterprise sector, we need to have the ability for the networks to be able to scale up and down. And as a part of that, the network scaling aspect, there is a specific initiative that started a few years back, and now it's gathering momentum with the usage of open interfaces between different elements of the network by disaggregating it and having open interfaces, along with what is known as virtualization of the network. And what that really means is that a lot of the processing is done at the edge, some of it done in data centers, and it's like a blended mix. So in that sense, having investments on the wireless network piece is equally important as it is to fund the devices that actually power these networks as well. So from our perspective, when we see the specifics of where the funding should go, what we are advocating for is let's pay attention to the network evolution as well, both in public networks and private networks with 5G and the usage of these what is known as ORAN or Open RAN based solutions that truly enable the scaling up and down of the network. That way, we believe that we can address the needs of all these different sectors that I mentioned before.
And Jason, I can imagine, as we were talking about before, that fiber optic cable is at the heart of a lot of the discussions taking place about how to get these networks out there. But it's also important that we have technology neutrality to ensure that wireline and wireless networks are equally thought of as part of this funding mechanism. What's the Corning perspective on how we can best advise policymakers on how to look at these technology issues? What should be prioritized as part of the funding?
Yeah, so obviously we believe fiber should go as far into the network as possible when it makes sense, right? There's extreme scenarios where other technologies may be the right fit for that time, and we try to work with customers on making sure their networks are right for them. But ultimately, what we want to see is fiber get as far into the network with this funding as possible, so that eventually, right, as bandwidth needs increase, as over-the-horizon technologies start to consume our bandwidth, and those rural communities need more technology capability, that you could, easily adapt or replace maybe subpar networks at that point with something more robust. And I think that brings up the point about subpar networks. We've seen that in the past with other funding mechanisms. When you have this much money that's on the table, you're going to have a lot of people come out of the woodwork that want to participate in this, right? And so we're firmly of the belief that states and governments should be ensuring that reputable, established vendors and firms and others participate in this, and you try to eliminate some of the bad actors. And additionally, with that, you need to think about the accountability of that funding after the fact. How are you going to hold the subgrantees accountable for the performance that they have promised in this? And there's a lot of folks around the industry that are willing to help and want to help. There's certainly trade associations like the Fiber Broadband Association and NTCA that are working together on a playbook for states to use to help them design parts of their program and get their broadband offices off the ground. They're working on that now, and states can certainly reach out to them if they want to participate in that. But we want to see, obviously, no matter the technology, it's going to be supported by a strong fiber backbone, strong fiber middle mile to get as far into the network as possible.
We have time for just one rapid fire round to bring us to the top of the hour. I want to ask each of you for your one piece of advice to policymakers, the one thing they should be paying attention to make sure this is a success. So I'll ask for 30 seconds from each of you. If you could only give one piece of advice to policymakers about how to do this right, how to make this funding program a success. And Alyssa, I'll start with you.
I like how you started with me on every question, Jason. So one piece of advice is that this is, as I said at the top, a truly historic investment. I don't think we should rush. I think we should view this as laying the foundation so that people who historically have been on the wrong side of the digital divide, as was said earlier, have an opportunity to have what the rest of us have. And that means investing in networks which not only meet the performance requirements of the law, but that can be cost effectively upgraded over time. This opportunity is not coming again. It's very unlikely that we'll see this kind of investment again in terms of CapEx. And so if we look at it that way, to say this is a one shot where we can meet needs for people who have been historically disadvantaged, let's build networks that will serve them well into the future, not 5 years into the future, but 10, 15, 20 years into the future. That's what I would focus on if I was a policymaker.
Great advice. I'm glad that I came to you first. John, what's your advice for policymakers to make this work?
No, I'm glad Alyssa went first as well. So thank you for that. But I would also say, we need to make sure that the investments that we're making are holistic in nature, and that we're thinking about that, right? Again, we don't want to narrowly slice digital infrastructure to only encompass broadband. I think there's just so much more that glues into that in terms of enabling technologies, enabling investments in infrastructure that's needed. And I think, again, being able to do that from the front side with sustainability in mind is just a tremendous opportunity, not just to bridge the digital divide and provide us digital equity, but I think really to be a strategic asset for the country and kind of be competitive on the global stage, right? Both in terms of economic development, but also, in kind of near-term words, like, you think about cybersecurity stance and what we need to be able to accomplish around that. And I think, again, this is just an incredible opportunity to look at all of those opportunities at once.
That's fantastic. Durga, what's your one piece of advice for policymakers?
I had like 30 seconds. So the way I would actually frame this is, it's important to understand that $65 billion. This is a pretty big investment. It's important to get it right. I can't actually state that enough number of times. We must maximize the chances of success with this. It's important to take the right decisions, pay attention to the innovation that's coming in from the industry, listen to the industry in that sense as well. This is an investment into the next 10 years. It doesn't matter how we are, where we are. It's more important as to where we really need to be. And maximizing chances of success by focusing on the innovative aspects is probably going to be one of the most important things as we move forward.
You get the last word with your last advice.
Sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that's already been said. The one thing I'll add is that one of the biggest things that's going to lead to failure is labor. Labor right now is in a crunch, and the timeline for some of this funding and guidance is really going to constrain this. The supply chain, which some folks would list as their number one concern right now, will fix itself. The free market will fix that, but labor is going to continue to be a challenge. And so what we forget is it's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So as states are thinking about their policies, think about the labor that's going to be required and how they can enable that labor through training programs or other sources into their policies. And that's really going to have the increase their chances of success of getting those Americans connected in the time frame that they really want to do it in. So that to me is the piece that we need to put into the conversation.
Last word. I wish we had more time, but I want to thank all four of you for your expert analysis. I want to thank, of course, Commissioner Starks for joining us earlier today. And thanks to all of you who have taken the time to join us for this event. Please stay tuned for our next events in our Bridge for Innovation series. We'll be taking on topics including workforce and cybersecurity issues. You'll be hearing more from us soon about that. In the meantime, please take a moment to visit us online at bridgeforinnovation.org to learn more. I'm Jason Oxman on behalf of the entire ITI team. Thank you for joining us today and look forward to seeing you next time.